Let's talk about season number 2, the key phases of the client journey. So in this session, when we think about creating an exceptional client experience, it's really easy to get caught in the big moments. What I want to do with you today is kind of break those down into specific stages of the transaction so that we can start fitting in where these moments of intention that we spoke of in session 1 are going to fit in. Logistically speaking, when are we going to be showing up? When are we going to be proactive with our communication? What resources are we going to be including at those moments? That's what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to talk about how we're going to build trust before the transaction. There's 3 key stages here. Before the transaction, there's during the transaction, and there's after the transaction. Before the transaction is the first time that a client interacts with you to offer submitted or accepted, rather. We're also going to be talking about guiding with confidence during the transaction. It's where we're really going to prove our value. It's all about the specific service that we're offering at that point. And then we're going to talk about celebrating success after the transaction. We're also going to kind of talk a little bit about those special circumstances on the fencers, situations that arise. Let's begin with phase 1, building trust before the transaction. I feel that this year was the year of before the transaction with the NAR settlement. This was the year that everyone was focusing on, like, wait, what? Like, how are we actually going specifically through step by step before the transaction to provide a consistent client onboarding experience every time that results in what? The employment agreement at the right time, not before, not after, right? So we're going to make sure that we're going to establishing trust early. How are we going to do that? How are we going to make sure that we are building in that connection that leads to what we need to do our jobs, which is the signed commitment, the go ahead to take on the next steps. From that first introduction to really understanding their needs through clarity, we're going to see how those small actions can really build a foundation of trust that's going to last throughout the journey. I want you guys to kind of think a little bit about a time with a client that the trust was not there and how it threw a wrench in the entire transaction for you. And we know that it's so important to be able to provide, again, those bumpers to keep our clients in the right way. But what if it's not received? Right? What if it's not, that offer or that invitation is not accepted? That's going to become the make or break moment that might just break the transaction. And so I want to think a little bit about the initial connection. Part of what Debbie had shared is their process of very intentionally making sure that they have the consultation right up front. But what if you're not setting the consultation right away? What if it takes a little while because they're very on the fence, or it takes a little bit of follow-up? What does that very first interaction look like leading up to the appointment and then making the ask of getting the employment contract signed? And part of that is a little bit of how do we introduce ourselves? How do we, in our marketing, guide our potential clients to understand when they need to reach out to us and what those next steps are looking like? From your marketing, and by show of hands, who is clearly articulating what the next steps look like for your potential clients on platforms that they're going to see, whether it's in your email newsletter or whether it's in even a flyer at an open house or in what you're doing on Instagram or Facebook? I saw 3 hands get up. I saw a hand back there. From the first interaction that someone has with your brand, let's look at it in the instance of an Instagram lead, right? Or maybe someone in our database, in our network, who just follows us on Instagram. There are so many opportunities in what we're posting to kind of illustrate what the first steps look like when they're meeting with you. And so I think a lot of times we expect our clients to know when to reach out to us and what that's going to look like. We talked a little bit earlier about setting that buyer consultation or even just having a phone call to first have a conversation. But how many times have you had clients who call you practically outside the house that they want to see? And you're like, we needed to do this like 3 months ago. What are you doing? You don't even have a pre-qual. You don't know what's, all this stuff. And I think that now is when we're really thinking about how are we articulating in the process when they need to be reaching out to us and what that process looks like. I think a lot of times some of the best content that we can be creating is specifically highlighting those moments of, oh my gosh, I just had a great conversation. This is on the stories. Just had a great conversation with a client who thinks that they're about 6 months out because their lease is ending at the end of the spring. And so they're trying to get their ducks in a row. And this is why I love talking to clients 6 months in advance of when they think they're going to do something, because I got to help this person do this, this, and this. That takes what could be a very stale offer of book a call with me when you're looking to buy or sell. And instead, in a story format, shows what happens when you are meeting with a real estate agent. When does that happen? And what needs to occur for everyone to feel really good about that interaction? And then making sure, obviously, that we have the system set up to do that. How are we including that in our marketing? How are we articulating it? When are we posting it? Where are we posting it? Maybe even in our buyer guides. If I know a lot of you have been working this year on putting together a buyer guide that can be downloaded, through a paywall or through something gated, right? Like someone signs up onto your email list and they get the buyer guide. Is that information in there? We think a lot about the transaction, but what about leading up to the transaction? And so those are kind of the conversations that I think that we really need to be having. And I think that we have been, but now I don't think we can not do this. It should not be a secret that the first time you meet with someone needs to be a little before they think they want to make a move. And it should not be a secret that you are going to be having a conversation. That is a part of your service that you can actually promote as a differentiator. Other realtors assume that other buyers and sellers think that this is the process and expect this to be the process. And so if you're already doing this really well, you need to be showcasing that you do it and also show the transformation that your clients have when they go through that process with you. Is that landing? Yeah, okay. Took me a while to land the plane, but we got there. So consider what initial materials, messages, or experiences that you can share to make a strong first impression. And this is specifically either in the marketing that you're doing to generate leads or that initial conversation from a lead. Phase 2. Let's go on to phase 2. During the transaction. Guiding with confidence during the transaction. So when we're guiding with confidence, this is really where you prove your value. And you know what's so funny is I feel like a lot of us probably nail it during the transaction. Like we might have little hiccups that the client doesn't see. Maybe we get a little last minute with a deadline or an email that we meant to send sooner, but it just ended up happening a little later. For the most part, when we have a transaction, we're like this. We're like we don't want to mess it up, right? So we've got it. And it has all of our focus so much to where it almost prohibits us from getting more clients because it's the only thing that we're looking at. That's another thing that we're going to talk about later. But when it comes to during the transaction, I want you guys to feel as good about the transaction as your clients do. You deserve to feel as in control and empowered and on top of it as your clients do because you go above and beyond for them, right? That's just one thing that I kind of want to make sure that I touch on. If you are putting so much effort into how the experience is from your clients, I also want you to think about how the experience is for you. Are you dropping the ball? Are we rewriting the same email for every transaction? Are we recreating the wheel? What does that actually look like from your point of view so that you feel absolutely in control of the transaction? Your systems are dialed in so that you then have the time and space to do something extraordinary for your clients. You're not just getting it done, you are going above and beyond, and you have the time to look for other wow opportunities to do something a little extra special for your clients. This is the most critical time when it comes to providing a seamless experience and really providing clear guidance. And so the first thing that comes to mind is how are we communicating? 90% of the transaction is communicating. During the transaction, there's a million moving parts. Think about what could break. Think about what could fall through. think about what could come up and be ready to kind of walk your clients through that, right? Walking them through a little bit about, it's not just the offer. It's never just going to be the offer. We have to look at the whole package. What does the financing look like? Who's backing them, right? So for example, we have sometimes where we'll see an offer come across on a listing with financing that like, we're like, them? You know what I mean? Like sometimes there's an institution that you have enough bad experiences with where you don't trust that lender anymore in that instance. And you can actually articulate that to your sellers at the listing appointments. Part of what we do, Mr. Seller, is not just help you market the property. We're not here just to list the home. We're here to help give you a discerning eye to what the right offer for you is really going to be. I recognize the most important thing to you right now is netting the amount that you want to get. But what if in the process of trying to net a certain amount, you get drugged through 3 different transactions that are falling through because we're going with buyers who don't perform. Now, here's what we do to help you do that. We're going to have a conversation with the buyer, if we can, with the buyer's agents before they submit the offer. Make sure that they are well qualified. Make sure that they've done their due diligence. If we're getting on the phone with a buyer's agent who has absolute terrible communication, and who is maybe has a terrible attitude, for example, like maybe we should have a conversation about that, you know? Obviously, there are some things that you cannot make decisions off of, just based off of like what we can and can't do, but we can help inform our sellers on what really matters and what's going to impact the transaction at the end. Now, at the same time, there are things that we can't foresee, things that are not predictable. And then we can also kind of call that out to sellers at different milestones. Hey, they submitted this absolutely insane inspection request. There are some things that are absolutely valid that you really you would probably expect this to be addressed if you were purchasing the home. And so let me walk you through different options on how we can help the buyers have a win-win situation with this while you're still getting closed. But at the same time, they don't have to accept that. They could, no matter what we offer them, decide to walk away, and here's what's going to happen at that point, right? And so again, understanding what you need to say as a prerequisite at the listing appointment, but also what you're baking into the milestone communication so that they remember what you said and that you're following through on how you're going to help protect them. And I think that goes back to the conversation piece, like the communication piece. All of these selling parties need to be on a group chat if you can. If you're texting your clients, all the parties who are involved with that transaction probably should be on that group text. Emails, obviously, all need to be, don't just assume that one point person is going to play telephone with these things because there's a lot of nuance to this. And so making sure that we have almost a blanket approach to our communication in that way. The process that we do to identify these moving parts is what we call IDEA. And we talk about IDEA quite a bit in Market Authority, but there's not like one specific place where this works because this can be applied to everything that you do. IDEA stands for identify, document, execute, and automate. Most of us want to do this backwards. Most of us, when we want to implement systems, when we want to start to systemize our business a little bit, we jump ahead to automate. We start looking for the best tools, we start looking for the best resources, but if we don't know specifically what we're looking to correct and what needs to be in place, then we can't make a well-informed decision on automate. We start with identify. Identify is identifying the workflow and the results we want to see. So an example, let's say you want to ensure that clients are receiving regular updates during the transaction. In that instance, we are identifying the during the transaction. You can go even deeper during a listing that is actively listed, during the buyer, right? Whatever portion of that we are looking at, we want to be specific. And maybe the workflow for client communication during the transaction, maybe what you're trying to include is a weekly check-in every week with your clients where you are proactively reaching out each week with updates. So we identify the workflow and the result we want to see. Workflow during the transaction communication, result, client gets a weekly personal touch base every week to feel secure and confident in the transaction. We then want to document each step involved in that workflow. So once you've identified the workflow, you're going to outline every step in detail. Step 3 is execute. We have to do it. So it's one thing to have an idea of how we want this process to look. It's a completely different thing to walk through it and make sure that it's actually the way that you want it to look. So this is where you're going to put it into action. You're going to follow those steps and make sure that everything flows smoothly and identify any areas that need adjustment here. And only then, after you do those first 3 steps, do you think about automating. Automating costs money, and automating can go wrong really quickly. Make sure the workflow works before then you identify what the automation needs to be. Now, sometimes automation can be as simple as templating an email that you send every week. You know that weekly client communication email that you send is like more or less the same format, template it. If you have any team members who are doing this, you are then going to train your team members to make sure that everybody's on the same page of how it's going to look and how it's executed, right? You can then go a step further and automate by schedulers, automate it with your CRM, create an action plan. You can get as complicated or as manual as you want to be with it. But the point is you don't have to recreate the wheel. You can use something like IDEA to make sure that this is getting done the way it needs to do, or it needs to be. Let's talk about after the transaction. The transaction might be over, but the relationship is just beginning. This is where we can really celebrate the milestone of the closing itself and stay connected long after closing day. So this is going to include the follow-ups, the celebrations, personalized touches that are key to turning clients into raving fans who can't wait to refer you. Did you know that if you get it right, your most enthusiastic clients will refer you 5 to 7 times within 24 months? After the closing, that's when we really want to reinforce the relationship and create those long-lasting memories. Now, a couple of things that you can do in this instance, and one thing that I think is a little underrated in my opinion, is reminding your clients about every step of the transaction. So like at the end of the closing, thinking back to some of the moments that happened where the client was really nervous or there was like a big disappointment. Maybe you had to go through multiple escrows for the client to finally land and close on a home. Reminding them, hey, there were so many times where you were so disappointed when the transaction fell apart because it just wasn't right for whatever reason. And now look at why. Look at where you are now. That's what that was all leading you to be. It was meant to be that you were to find this house and that it was going to work, right? So there's obviously those things where you can do those kind of callbacks to like moments that they may have forgotten. I mean, I think we need to be thinking about this. And if you're already doing this really well, then just continue doing it and look for a different area where you can go all in, right? Next, we go to the last part of this section is on the fences and other moments. There are other moments that matter in the transaction. Not every client journey is straightforward. Think about those moments where you can really empathize with your clients, when you can listen, when you can provide helpful information along the way, right? These clients in those situations, they need a reassuring touch. They need to know that they're not alone. They need to know that the situation they're experiencing is not unique to them. I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of clients, every now and then when we have like a really tough situation, one thing that I hear from our clients a lot is, oh, of course this would happen to us. And we're like, you're not even the first person this month for this to happen to, right? And I think just that alone, and you don't have to say it with a sense of like, well, you're not the only one, but instead allowing them to understand like this just kind of happens. You didn't do anything wrong. Like there's nothing, no one's at fault here. Sometimes this is just the way transactions go. Think ahead to 2025 and think of number one, what are your future clients going to run into in the next year? You can also think of those who are on the fence. If you have clients who are on the fence between now and the end of the year because of the election, because of the holidays, whatever's happening, what's one strategy that you're going to have to walk them through it? So think about like the next time you get a call from someone who's like, my water heater broke, I need, whatever. How are you then going to share the story later? Right? Are you going to go onto the stories or are you going to go like speak to another client later and say like, you know what, it's so funny that you mentioned that. I actually had a client reach out to me because their water heater busted and it was time for a new one. And I was looking back at their file and they bought 3 years ago. I want to be the kind of realtor that you can reach back out to 3 years from now when something goes wrong, right? And know that I'll have the support for you.